This black secretary got pregnant. The CEO denied their secret affairs 5 years later. She returned with a handsome son and took over the company directorial position. The pregnancy test trembled in Jasmine Carter's dark hands like a verdict she wasn't ready to hear. 2 pink lines stared back at her with the unwavering certainty of changed destiny, each one a small revolution that would reshape everything she'd carefully built over 5 years at Stone Enterprises. In the sterile silence of the executive bathroom, surrounded by marble on the walls, she felt the weight of a secret that could either destroy her career or transform her life, depending entirely on how the man she loved would choose to see her now. Not as his indispensable secretary, not as the woman who'd shared his bed in stolen moments, but as the mother of his child in a world that had never been designed for women like her to win. Before I dive deep into this story, God bless you as you do me a favor by hitting the subscribe button. Like this video and share it to family and friends, because that's the best way you can show me support on this channel. Tomorrow, I have other beautiful stories to share with you, and you would not like to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. The bright light in the bathroom cast harsh shadows across Jasmine's face as she stared at the 2 pink lines that would change everything. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman caught between worlds. Professional blazer perfectly pressed, natural hair pulled into a sleek bun, but eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes when your carefully constructed life begins to crack. She'd built her reputation as William Stone's executive secretary through precision and discretion. 5 years of arriving first, leaving last, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. 5 years of being the only black woman on the 42nd floor, navigating the subtle looks and coded language with grace that her grandmother had taught her was armor. But 3 months ago, everything shifted during that late-night strategy session when rain pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows and William's usual professional distance melted into something raw and hungry. His lips had found hers between quarterly reports, his hands tangling in her hair as whispered promises fell like prayers in the darkness of his corner office. Now, clutching the pregnancy test, those promises felt like ghosts. Jasmine slipped the test into her purse, her fingers brushing against the small velvet box that had been there for weeks. The ring William had given her during their second secret encounter. Promising this was more than just attraction, more than just the thrill of the forbidden. "Ms. Carter," a voice echoed from the hallway. "Mr. Stone is asking for you." "Coming," she called, her voice steadier than her pulse. 43 floors above the bustling streets of downtown San Francisco, William Stone stood at his office window, watching the morning fog roll across the bay. His reflection showed a man who had everything: inherited wealth, Harvard MBA, a company worth billions, and the kind of sharp jawline that graced magazine covers. But his eyes held the weight of a man running from something he couldn't name. The board meeting was in 20 minutes, and he should be reviewing projections. Instead, his mind kept drifting to Jasmine, the way she'd looked at him yesterday when he'd kept their conversation strictly professional in front of Robert, the way her smile had faltered when he'd stepped back just a little too quickly when others entered the room. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Dinner with the Bradfords tonight. Catherine is lovely, William. Time to think about settling down with someone suitable." Someone suitable. The words tasted bitter. William had spent 35 years being suitable. Suitable schools, suitable friends, suitable women from suitable families. But nothing had ever felt like those stolen moments with Jasmine. Her laugh during late dinners, the way she challenged his ideas without losing respect, how she made him feel like more than just his father's legacy. The intercom crackled. "Mr. Stone, Ms. Carter is here. Send her in." Jasmine entered with her usual professional composure, tablet in hand, but something was different. A tension in her shoulders, a careful distance as she approached his desk. She wore a navy dress that complemented her rich brown skin, but her usual confident stride seemed measured, cautious. "The Morrison files," she said, placing documents before him without meeting his eyes. Their fingers brushed as he reached for the papers, and the familiar electricity sparked between them. But instead of the small smile that usually played at her lips, Jasmine pulled back quickly. Jasmine. His voice was softer now, dropping the formal pretense they maintained during office hours. Is everything? The board meeting starts in 15 minutes, she interrupted, her professional mask firmly in place. Robert is waiting in conference room A with the quarterly reports. William studied her face, noting the barely perceptible tremor in her voice, the way she avoided his gaze. 3 months of secret intimacy had taught him to read her subtle signals, and right now, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. But the weight of propriety, of his position, of what others might think if they sensed anything beyond professional courtesy between them, pressed down like fog. He straightened his tie, becoming the CEO again. Of course. Thank you, Ms. Carter. As she turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Hurt disappointment, maybe even resignation. It was the same look his mother had worn years ago when his father chose business over family, again and again, until she stopped expecting anything different. The door closed with a soft click, leaving William alone with the morning fog and the growing certainty that he was about to make the same mistakes as the men who came before him. In the elevator, Jasmine pressed her hand against her still flat stomach and wondered if love was always this complicated, or if she was just naive enough to believe a man like William Stone could ever choose her over everything else that defined his world. When we meet someone in a position of power, do we see them as they truly are, or only as their position allows us to see? The boardroom fell silent as the last executive filed out, leaving only the scent of expensive cologne and the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Jasmine moved efficiently around the mahogany table, collecting abandoned coffee cups and forgotten notepads, her movements mechanical but her mind racing. William lingered by the floor-to-ceiling windows, loosening his tie with the slow deliberation of a man buying time. The afternoon sun cast golden streaks across his profile, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the uncertainty in his usually confident posture. "Leave it," he said quietly as she reached for his coffee cup. "Please." The word please hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. In 3 months of stolen moments, he'd never sounded so vulnerable in this room. Their professional sanctuary, where he was always the commanding CEO and she was always the composed secretary. Jasmine straightened, her dark eyes finally meeting his. The fluorescent lights caught the gold flecks in her brown irises, and William felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever he really looked at her. Not as his employee, but as the woman who had somehow slipped past every wall he'd built. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. William moved closer, drawn by something in her tone he'd never heard before, a mixture of strength and fragility that made his protective instincts flare. "What's wrong? You've been different all day." The space between them crackled with the same electricity that had ignited their first kiss, but now it felt dangerous, charged with consequences neither had considered when this began. Jasmine's breath caught as he stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne, see the concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "William, she faltered, her professional composure finally cracking. The weight of the morning's discovery, the pregnancy test hidden in her purse, the impossible choice between honesty and self-preservation, it all crashed over her at once. He reached for her then, his hands cupping her face with the tenderness that had undone her 3 months ago. "Tell me," he whispered, and in that moment, he wasn't the heir to a corporate empire or the man whose mother arranged his social calendar. He was just William, the man who had held her through rain-soaked nights and whispered dreams they both pretended weren't impossible. "I'm pregnant." The words dropped between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that would reach every corner of their carefully constructed world. William's hands stilled against her cheeks, his eyes searching hers as if he could somehow rewrite what she'd just said. The silence stretched, filled with the distant hum of traffic 43 floors below and the thundering of 2 hearts suddenly out of sync. Jasmine watched his face cycle through shock, disbelief, and something that might have been fear or joy. She couldn't tell which, and that uncertainty cut deeper than any rejection could have. "Are you sure?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "2 tests. This morning." Her hands found his wrists, holding on to him even as she felt him beginning to pull away. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. She could see it in his eyes, the way his mind was already calculating consequences, weighing risks, measuring this revelation against everything else in his meticulously ordered life. William's hands dropped from her face as he stepped back, running fingers through his perfectly styled hair. "Jesus, Jasmine. How did this?" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "That's not. I didn't mean." But the damage was done. Those half-spoken words revealed everything. His shock wasn't the overwhelming joy of an unexpected blessing, but the panic of a man whose life had just spiraled beyond his control. Jasmine felt something inside her chest fracture, a sharp pain that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with the way he was looking at her now, as if she'd become a problem to be solved rather than the woman he'd claimed to love. "I need to think," he said, more to himself than to her. "This changes everything. The company, my family, the board. What about us?" The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and desperate in a way that made her hate herself for asking. William met her eyes then, and she saw her answer in the conflict written across his features. She saw the man who had whispered promises in the dark warring with the CEO, who had an image to protect, a legacy to maintain, a position that couldn't afford the scandal of an affair with his secretary, especially not one that had resulted in a child. "I don't know," he said, and those 3 words shattered something inside her that she hadn't even realized was still hopeful. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting everything golden and deceptively warm. In that light, they looked like lovers caught in an intimate moment. But Jasmine felt the chill of reality settling around them like fog rolling in from the bay. She straightened her shoulders, calling upon every lesson her grandmother had taught her about dignity in the face of disappointment. "I see. Jasmine, that's not." William reached for her again, but she stepped back, maintaining the professional distance that had always been their safety net. Only now it felt like a chasm. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice steady again, professional. "You have the Henderson call at 4. As she moved toward the door, William called her name one more time. She paused, her hand on the polished handle, and looked back at him. He stood silhouetted against the window, powerful and untouchable, exactly as he'd been the day she first walked into his office 5 years ago. "We'll figure this out," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Jasmine nodded once, a gesture that could have meant anything or nothing at all, and walked out of the boardroom carrying the weight of a secret that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. Behind her, William remained frozen at the window, watching the sun sink lower over San Francisco Bay, and wondering when exactly he'd become the kind of man who made promises he wasn't sure he could keep. 3 days of careful choreography followed, a dance of avoidance performed in the sterile corridors of Stone Enterprises. Jasmine arrived earlier, left later, and perfected the art of being indispensable while remaining invisible. She fielded William's calls, scheduled his meetings, and maintained the flawless efficiency that had defined their professional relationship for 5 years, all while pretending her world hadn't shifted on its axis. William buried himself in mergers and acquisitions, staying late enough that the cleaning crew had learned to work around him. He spoke to Jasmine in clipped professional sentences. "Please reschedule the Morrison meeting. The quarterly reports need revision. Hold my calls for the next hour." As if formality could somehow contain the chaos threatening to spill into every corner of his controlled existence. But avoidance, Jasmine discovered, was a luxury pregnant women couldn't afford. The morning sickness arrived like clockwork at 9:47 a.m., forcing her to excuse herself from William's office mid-sentence during a conference call with Tokyo investors. She barely made it to the bathroom before her stomach revolted, leaving her gripping the marble countertop as waves of nausea reminded her that some truths couldn't be rationalized away. "Girl, you look like death warmed over." Ava observed when Jasmine returned to her desk, her best friend's sharp eyes missing nothing despite her casual tone. Ava had been the cleaning lady when Jasmine first started as a junior secretary. Now she ran the building's hospitality services, but she still stopped by Jasmine's desk every morning for their ritual coffee gossip. "Just tired," Jasmine lied, accepting the ginger tea Ava pressed into her hands without question. Some friendships transcended words. Ava settled into the chair across from Jasmine's desk, her dark eyes studying her friend's face with the intensity of someone who had watched her navigate this corporate jungle for years. "And I suppose you're just tired of eating crackers for breakfast too." Jasmine's hands stilled on her keyboard. She hadn't realized Ava had noticed the sleeve of saltines hidden in her desk drawer, the careful way she'd been nibbling them before meetings to settle her stomach. "It's nothing," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "Nothing doesn't make a woman like you, a woman who can negotiate million-dollar deals before her first cup of coffee, look like she's carrying the weight of the world." Ava leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And nothing makes Mr. High and Mighty CEO walk around here looking like somebody stole his favorite toy." Before Jasmine could respond, William's office door opened. He emerged with Robert, deep in conversation about quarterly projections, but his eyes found hers immediately, a habit he'd developed over months of stolen glances. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and she saw the question in his gaze, the concern he couldn't quite suppress. Then Robert said something about the Henderson account, and William's attention snapped back to business, the moment dissolving like morning mist. "That man's got it bad," Ava observed quietly, following Jasmine's gaze. "It's not like that," Jasmine said automatically, the denial coming as easily as breathing. She'd been practicing it for days now, trying to convince herself that those 3 months of whispered promises and stolen kisses had been some kind of elaborate self-delusion. "Honey, I've been watching rich white men pretend they don't want what they can't have for longer than you've been alive. That man wants you so bad he can taste it, but he's scared of what wanting you might cost him." The truth in Ava's words hit like a physical blow. Jasmine pressed her lips together, fighting back the tears that had been threatening to spill since Tuesday afternoon. "It doesn't matter what he wants. Some things are more important than I want." "Like what?" "Like reality." Jasmine's voice was steady, professional. The same tone she used to deflect unwanted advances from board members or navigate the subtle racism that came with being the only black woman in most rooms. Like knowing your place. Like not confusing fantasy with possibility. Ava was quiet for a long moment, studying Jasmine's face. Finally, she reached across the desk and squeezed her friend's hand. "Since when did Jasmine Carter start talking about knowing her place? The woman I know takes her place. She doesn't wait for permission." Before Jasmine could respond, her phone buzzed with an internal call. William's name appeared on the display, and her heart did that treacherous skip it had been doing for months. "Ms. Carter," his voice was carefully neutral through the speaker. "Could you come to my office, please? We need to discuss the Morrison contract." There was no Morrison contract. They both knew it. "Of course, Mr. Stone." She kept her voice equally professional, ignoring Ava's knowing look. "Think about what I said," Ava murmured as Jasmine gathered her tablet and headed toward William's office. "Some things are worth fighting for, especially when the world tells you they're not yours to have." Jasmine paused at William's door, tablet clutched against her chest like armor. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette pacing behind his desk, a caged lion in an expensive suit. For 3 days, they'd both been pretending that avoidance was a solution, that professional distance could somehow undo the intimacy they'd shared, the life they'd created together. But her body was changing daily, reminding her that some consequences couldn't be wished away or buried under quarterly reports and corporate hierarchy. In a few weeks, her condition would become visible to everyone. In a few months, she'd be forced to take maternity leave. And eventually, she'd return to work with a child who carried William's eyes and her determination, living proof of what they'd tried so hard to deny. She knocked twice, the sound sharp in the hushed corridor. "Come in." As she turned the handle, Jasmine wondered if this would be the conversation where they finally stopped pretending they could go back to before, or if they would find new, more elaborate ways to deny what was growing between them, demanding recognition with every passing day. The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing them once again in the space where everything had begun, and where, one way or another, everything would have to be decided. The elevator shuddered to a halt between the 38th and 39th floors with a mechanical groan that seemed to echo through Jasmine's bones. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in an amber glow that made the small space feel even more confining. "Perfect," William muttered, pressing the emergency button with more force than necessary. The intercom crackled to life, filled with static and the distant voice of building maintenance promising they'd be freed as soon as possible. As soon as possible, in Friday evening traffic in downtown San Francisco, could mean hours. Jasmine pressed her back against the far wall, tablet clutched against her chest, trying to maintain the professional distance that had become her lifeline over the past week. But the elevator car suddenly felt impossibly small, shrinking with each breath until she could feel the heat radiating from William's body across the 3 feet of space between them. "Are you okay?" His voice had shed its corporate polish, returning to the soft concern that had first undone her defenses months ago. "I'm fine." The lie came automatically, even as her stomach churned with the familiar waves of nausea that seemed to strike at the worst possible moments. The elevator's stale air wasn't helping, nor was the way William kept glancing at her with that mixture of worry and guilt she'd grown to recognize. He loosened his tie, a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "You don't look fine. You haven't looked fine all week." "I wonder why," she said, the words sharper than she'd intended. The forced professionalism she'd been maintaining cracked under the weight of exhaustion and hormones. "Maybe it's because I'm carrying your child and you've been treating me like I have something contagious." William flinched as if she'd slapped him. "That's not, I haven't been." 3 days, William. 3 days of MS, Carter this and MS, Carter that, like we're strangers. Like you never helped me. Like you never promised me things you apparently never meant. The elevator swayed slightly, a reminder of their precarious positions suspended between floors, between decisions, between the life they'd built in secret and the one they'd have to face in public. William ran his hands through his hair, disheveling the perfect styling that was as much armor as her professional clothes. "Do you know what would happen if people found out? If the board discovered that you what? Fell in love with your secretary." The words hung between them like a challenge. "Or that you were stupid enough to sleep with the help." "Don't." His voice was sharp now, cutting through the amber light like a blade. "Don't make this about that." "Then what is it about?" Jasmine pushed off from the wall, anger giving her strength she hadn't felt in days. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. The powerful white CEO who had his fun with the black secretary and now doesn't want to deal with the consequences. That's not fair." "Fair?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been thinking about consequences before you told me you loved me. Fair would have been considering what might happen before you gave me this." She pulled the small velvet box from her purse, the ring he'd given her gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. William stared at the box as if it contained a grenade. "I do love you, but not enough." The words came out quieter than she'd intended, carrying the weight of every doubt she'd harbored since the moment she'd told him about the pregnancy. "Not enough to fight for me. Not enough to risk your precious reputation." The elevator gave another mechanical groan, and suddenly William was across the small space, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I don't lie awake every night thinking about you, about us, about what kind of father I could be?" His voice broke slightly on the last word. "I've spent my entire life being groomed to take over this company, to maintain the family legacy. I don't know how to be anything else. So learn." Jasmine's hands found his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath the expensive fabric. Learn to be more than what your father made you. Learn to be the man you were when it was just us in this building at midnight, when you told me about your dreams that had nothing to do with quarterly profits. For a moment, William's mask slipped completely. She saw the boy who'd grown up in boarding schools, the young man who'd buried his own desires under expectations and social obligations, the adult who'd never been allowed to want something just because it made him happy. "What if I can't?" he whispered. "What if I try and I'm just like him, choosing the company over everything else that matters? Then at least we'll know you tried." Jasmine's voice was gentler now, seeing the fear behind his resistance. "But right now, you're choosing the company over us without even fighting. You're making the same choice and calling it inevitable." The intercom crackled again, maintenance updating them on repair progress, but neither moved away from the other. In the amber light, suspended between floors and decisions, they stood close enough that Jasmine could see the flecks of green in William's gray eyes, close enough that he could count the freckles scattered across her brown skin like constellations. "I'm scared," he admitted, the words barely audible. "So am I." Jasmine's hand moved to rest over her still flat stomach. "But I'm more scared of raising our child knowing that their father was too afraid to even try to be part of their life." William's hand covered hers, warm and solid against the silk of her dress. For the first time since she'd told him about the pregnancy, he looked at her stomach with something other than panic. Wonder, maybe, or the first tentative stirrings of joy. "Our child," he repeated, as if testing how the words felt. "Our child," she confirmed. The elevator lurched suddenly, machinery engaging as repairs progressed. They would be freed soon, returned to the world of offices and expectations, board meetings and social obligations. But for now, in this suspended moment, William's forehead rested against hers, and his hand remained pressed to the place where their future was growing. "What happens when these doors open?" he asked. Jasmine closed her eyes, breathing in his familiar scent, memorizing this moment of honesty between them. "That's up to you, William. It's always been up to you." The elevator shuddered back to life, carrying them upward toward decisions that could no longer be postponed. The photograph fell from the back of William's desk drawer like a forgotten secret demanding recognition. Jasmine had only been looking for the backup USB drive containing the Morrison files when her fingers brushed against the frame, sending it tumbling to the Persian rug with a soft thud. She bent to retrieve it, expecting to find another corporate headshot or family portrait from William's carefully curated public life. Instead, she found herself staring at a young black woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, standing beside a much younger William outside what looked like a community center. He couldn't have been more than 22, his expensive clothes looking out of place against the modest building's brick facade. "You shouldn't be going through my things." Jasmine spun around to find William in the doorway, his face pale as he took the photograph in her hands. It was Monday evening, 3 days since the elevator incident, and they'd been dancing around each other with renewed caution, as if proximity had reminded them both how dangerous honesty could be. "I was looking for the Morrison files," she said, but her eyes kept returning to the photograph. There was something in the way young William looked at the woman, a tenderness, an openness that she'd only glimpsed in their most intimate moments. "Who is she?" William closed the door behind him with deliberate care, the click of the lock seeming to echo in the spacious office. "Her name was Keisha Washington. She was." He paused, struggling with words that seemed to carry more weight than he'd prepared for. "She was my girlfriend. In college." Jasmine felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Was. She died. 7 years ago." William moved to his desk, taking the photograph from her hands with the reverence reserved for sacred relics. "Lupus. She was 28. The simple words carried the weight of old grief, and Jasmine found herself studying William's face, seeing the shadows that had always lingered at the edges of his smiles. "You loved her." It wasn't a question. The truth was written in the careful way he held the frame, in the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. "I did." William sank into his chair, staring at the photograph as if it could transport him back to simpler times. We met during my junior year at Stanford. She was getting her master's in social work, volunteering at the community center in East Palo Alto. I was supposed to be there for a service project, mandatory community service for my fraternity. Jasmine settled into the chair across from his desk, recognizing the need for distance this conversation required. What happened? I fell in love with her the first day. She was teaching literacy classes to kids who reminded me that the world existed beyond Stanford's manicured campus. William's fingers traced the edge of the frame. She was brilliant, passionate about justice, completely unimpressed by my family name or my trust fund. She called me on my privilege in ways that made me want to be better. And your family? William's laugh was bitter. My father threatened to cut me off. My mother suggested I was having some kind of rebellious phase that I'd outgrow. They never said it was about race directly. They were too sophisticated for that. It was always about compatibility and different worlds and thinking about the future. Jasmine felt a chill of recognition. She'd heard similar coded language throughout her career, the polite ways people expressed prejudice without admitting to it. But you stayed with her. For 2 years. I was going to propose after graduation. William set the photograph on his desk, positioning it so they could both see Keisha's face. I had the ring picked out, plans for a simple ceremony. I was ready to tell my family they could accept us or lose me. What changed? She got sick. Really sick. The lupus was aggressive, and the treatments were. He shook his head. She needed specialists, experimental therapies that insurance wouldn't cover. The kind of medical care that required the resources my family had. Understanding dawned slowly, along with a sick certainty about where this story was heading. Your parents made you choose. Not directly. They never said choose between us and her. They just made it clear that if I wanted access to the family's medical connections, the private doctors, the experimental treatments that might save her life. William's voice trailed off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. You had to end the relationship. I had to become the son they'd always wanted. Join the company, date the right women, stop embarrassing the family name. His hands clenched into fists on the polished desk surface. I told myself it was temporary, that once she was better, once the treatments worked, I could go back to her. I could explain. Jasmine's heart was breaking for both of them. For the woman who'd fought for her life while losing the man she loved, and for William, who'd been forced to choose between love and salvation. Did the treatments work? For a while. She went into remission for almost a year. But by then, I was already engaged to Catherine Bradford. My parents had made sure the announcement was in all the society pages, that there was no graceful way to back out without scandal. William's voice was hollow now, emptied of emotion by years of practiced suppression. Keisha saw the engagement announcement in the newspaper. She never spoke to me again. And when she died, I wasn't allowed to grieve publicly. Couldn't attend the funeral without raising questions about why the heir to Stone Enterprises was mourning a social worker from East Palo Alto. William finally looked up, meeting Jasmine's eyes. I sent flowers anonymously. I set up a scholarship fund in her name through a shell corporation. But I couldn't even say goodbye. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Jasmine saw now why William had retreated so quickly after learning about her pregnancy, why the fear in his eyes had been so familiar. He'd lived this story before. Love constrained by family expectations, by racial and class prejudices, by the impossible choice between personal happiness and familial duty. Is that why you never married Catherine? She asked quietly. I couldn't. 3 weeks before the wedding, I called it off. Told my parents I wasn't ready, that I needed more time. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about Keisha, about the life we could have had if I'd been braver. If I'd chosen love over legacy. Jasmine studied his face, seeing the guilt and regret that had shaped him in the years since. And now history is repeating itself. No. William's response was immediate, fierce. This is different. You're different. I'm different. Am I? Or am I just another black woman you love but can't afford to choose? The question came out sharper than she'd intended, but she needed to know. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the same story with different players. William stood abruptly, moving to the window that offered a view of the city spreading out below them like scattered diamonds. I was 24 when I lost Keisha. Young, naive, completely unprepared to fight a system that had been in place long before I was born. I let them convince me that sacrifice was nobility, that destroying my own happiness was somehow heroic. He turned back to face her, and she saw something new in his expression. Not the panic or guilt that had defined their recent interactions, but a quiet determination that reminded her of the man who'd built an empire, who'd never backed down from a challenge in the boardroom. But I'm not 24 anymore. I'm not powerless. And I won't let them take you from me the way they took her. Jasmine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the conviction in his voice. But she'd also seen how quickly resolve could crumble under family pressure, how even the strongest love could be rationalized away when the stakes felt impossibly high. Pretty words, she said carefully. But words are easy when we're alone in your office. What happens when your mother calls? When the board starts asking questions? When loving me costs you everything you've built? William returned to his desk, picking up Keisha's photograph once more. Then I'll find out if I've learned anything from losing the most important thing once before. He opened his desk drawer and carefully placed the photograph inside, not hiding it but treating it with the respect of a lesson learned at tremendous cost. When he looked up at Jasmine again, she saw something she hadn't seen since the day she'd told him about the pregnancy: hope. I can't promise it will be easy, he said, but I can promise that this time I'll fight. For you, for our child, for the life we could have together. I won't make the same mistake twice. Jasmine sat in the growing twilight of his office, wanting desperately to believe that love could be enough this time, that the man who'd lost everything once had learned how to hold onto what mattered. But she also knew that some lessons could only be learned through living them, and that promises made in the safety of private moments would soon be tested by the harsh light of public scrutiny. The question was whether William Stone had truly changed, or whether he was still the young man who'd chosen duty over love, just with better reasons for doing so. How do we break cycles of past trauma and fear when facing similar circumstances? Do our old wounds guide us toward wisdom or repeat our mistakes? The 20-week ultrasound image looked like abstract art to most people, swirls of black and white that required a trained eye to interpret. But to Jasmine, lying on the examination table with cool gel spread across her rounded belly, it was the first real glimpse of the tiny person who had been making their presence known through morning sickness and exhaustion. "There's the head," Dr. Martinez said, moving the wand with practiced precision. "And you can see the spine here, perfectly formed. Very active, little one. Look at those limbs moving." Jasmine watched the monitor with wonder, tears blurring her vision as she saw the unmistakable flutter of a heartbeat, the delicate curve of a profile that somehow already looked familiar. This was real now in a way it hadn't been before, not just the abstract concept of pregnancy, but an actual child growing inside her. "Would you like to know the gender?" Dr. Martinez asked with a smile. Jasmine hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. For weeks, she'd been coming to these appointments alone, making decisions alone, preparing to raise this child alone. The question felt too big for one person to answer. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Martinez looked toward the door with a raised eyebrow. "Are you expecting someone?" Before Jasmine could answer, the door opened to reveal William, looking uncharacteristically nervous in his perfectly tailored suit. He held a small bouquet of yellow roses, careful, gender-neutral, hopeful. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said, his eyes moving between Jasmine and the doctor with uncertainty. "Traffic was. If this is a bad time, I can wait outside." Dr. Martinez looked between them with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen every variety of complicated family dynamics. "Father, I presume?" "Yes," William said, just as Jasmine said. "It's complicated." The doctor smiled diplomatically. Well, complicated or not, we have a very healthy baby here who seems eager to meet both of you. Would you like to see? William approached the examination table slowly, as if afraid sudden movements might shatter this fragile moment. When Jasmine nodded toward the chair beside her, he sat down carefully, his eyes immediately drawn to the monitor. He stopped, seeming to struggle for words as he watched their child move on the screen. That's our baby. Very active, Dr. Martinez repeated, adjusting the wand to get a better view. Strong heartbeat, good size for 20 weeks. Everything looks perfect. William reached for Jasmine's hand without thinking, his fingers intertwining with hers as they both watched their child stretch and turn. The simple contact sent warmth up Jasmine's arm. The first time they'd touched without pretense or professional necessity since the elevator incident. We were just discussing whether Mom wants to know the gender, Dr. Martinez said tactfully. Jasmine looked at William, seeing the same wonder in his eyes that she felt. What do you think? I think, William said softly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand, that I want to know everything about this little person. If you're ready to know. Dr. Martinez moved the wand again, angling for a different view. Well, if you both want to know. She paused, smiling at the screen. Congratulations. You're having a son. A son. The words hit William like a physical force, and Jasmine watched emotions cycle across his face. Joy, fear, responsibility, love. He squeezed her hand tighter, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. A boy, he whispered, and she heard years of complicated feelings about fathers and sons, about legacies and expectations, about the kind of man he wanted to be versus the kind of man he'd been raised to become. Would you like some pictures? Dr. Martinez asked, already printing multiple copies of the clearest shots. I always recommend the grandparents' copies. They tend to get a bit excited. The mention of grandparents brought reality crashing back. William's grip on Jasmine's hand tightened almost imperceptibly, and she saw the shadow cross his face. They hadn't talked about families, about the inevitable conversations and complications that would come with making this relationship public. After Dr. Martinez left them alone to clean up and get dressed, the silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. William stood by the window, studying the ultrasound pictures with the intensity he usually reserved for quarterly reports. You came, Jasmine said finally, pulling her sweater back on over her growing belly. You didn't tell me not to. William turned from the window, and she saw vulnerability in his expression that reminded her of the man who'd held her during rainstorms and whispered dreams in the dark. I know I don't have the right to be here, not after how I've handled everything. But when I realized it was your appointment day. How did you know it was my appointment day? William had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have noticed the pattern in your calendar requests. The 20-week mark seemed important enough that you shouldn't have to face it alone. Despite everything, Jasmine felt her heart soften. He'd been paying attention, even when they were pretending to maintain professional distance. Even when he'd been struggling with his own fears and family expectations. He looks like you, she said, gesturing toward the ultrasound pictures. The profile, the way he was moving his hands, very dramatic, very commanding. William laughed, the sound surprising them both with its naturalness. Poor kid. He's doomed to a lifetime of people expecting him to know what he's doing. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Jasmine said softly. Having high expectations can make you rise to meet them. They were quiet for a moment, both looking at the pictures of their son, and the weight of that reality settling around them like a shared blanket. I've been thinking about names, William said suddenly. I know it's presumptuous, and we haven't talked about any of this, but I keep finding myself wondering what we'd call him. What kind of names? Jasmine asked, curious despite herself. Strong names. Names that mean something. William sat down in the chair he'd occupied during the ultrasound, close enough to touch, but respecting the space between them. I was thinking about Cameron. It means crooked nose, which isn't very inspiring, but I had a friend in college named Cameron who was the bravest person I knew. He never backed down from what was right, even when it cost him. Cameron, Jasmine repeated, testing how it felt on her tongue. Cameron Stone? Or Cameron Carter, William said quickly. Or Cameron Carter Stone. Or whatever you want. I want him to have a name that reminds him he can be whoever he chooses to be, not just who the world expects him to be. The careful way he offered options, the respect in his voice for her choices, the hope wrapped in uncertainty, it all combined to crack something open in Jasmine's chest. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who'd made her believe in possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Cameron, she said again, one hand resting on her stomach. I like it. Cameron Carter Stone has a nice ring to it. William's smile was soft, transformative. You'd really hyphenate? Why wouldn't I? He's both of ours. He should carry both our names, both our strengths. Jasmine looked down at the ultrasound pictures, seeing their future in those grainy black and white images. Besides, Carter Stone sounds like the name of someone who knows exactly who he is and isn't like his mother, William said quietly. And like his father, when his father remembers who he really is underneath all the expectations. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the reality of their son, of the choices they were making and the ones still ahead of them. Outside, San Francisco afternoon fog was rolling in from the bay, but the doctor's office felt warm and separate from the world's complications. What happens now? Jasmine asked eventually. William looked at the ultrasound pictures again, then at her face, and she saw something settle in his expression, a decision being made in real time. Now we figure out how to be a family, he said. Whatever that looks like, whatever it costs, whatever anyone else thinks about it. We figure out how to give Cameron the parents he deserves. Even if it's complicated, especially because it's complicated. William reached for her hand again, and this time there was nothing tentative about the gesture. The best things usually are. As they left the doctor's office together, ultrasound pictures tucked carefully in Jasmine's purse and William's hand warm against the small of her back. Neither spoke about the storms they could see gathering on the horizon. For now, it was enough to walk forward together, toward whatever came next, united by love for the little boy who had brought them back to each other, and the fragile hope that love might be enough this time. The fog was rolling in thick from the bay, but for the first time in weeks, Jasmine felt like she could see clearly. The Stone family's annual charity gala was San Francisco's social event of the season. 500 of the city's most influential people gathered in the grand ballroom of the St. Francis Hotel to celebrate philanthropy while networking over champagne and 7-course dinners. Jasmine had coordinated the event for 3 years running, managing every detail from table arrangements to wine pairings, but always from behind the scenes. Tonight, she stood in the shadows near the service entrance, 6 months pregnant, and watching William work the room with the practiced charm that had been bred into him since childhood. Her black dress, carefully chosen to minimize her condition, still couldn't completely hide the swell of her belly, but in the dim lighting and crowded ballroom, she'd managed to remain relatively invisible, until Elizabeth Stone spotted her. William's mother approached with the measured grace of a woman accustomed to controlling every social situation, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She wore a navy gown that probably cost more than Jasmine's annual salary, and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. "Ms. Carter," Elizabeth said, her voice carrying the particular warmth reserved for addressing the help in public. "How lovely to see you here tonight. Though I must say you look different." There was no mistaking the pointed look at Jasmine's midsection, the calculated pause that made it clear this encounter was no accident. Elizabeth Stone had built a career in social warfare, and she never fired warning shots. "Mrs. Stone," Jasmine replied evenly, calling upon every lesson in dignity her grandmother had taught her. "The event is running smoothly. The auction exceeded projected earnings by 30%. How wonderful. Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've always been so thorough in your duties." Elizabeth's smile never wavered, but her eyes were arctic. "Tell me, how long have you been with the company now?" 5 years. Yes, ma'am. Such dedication. And now I hear you'll be taking an extended leave soon. Elizabeth's tone suggested she already knew exactly why, exactly when, and exactly who was responsible. Jasmine felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. I haven't made any official announcements yet. Of course not. These things require such delicate handling, don't they? Particularly when they might reflect poorly on the company's reputation. Elizabeth stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. Or on my son's future. Across the ballroom, William was deep in conversation with board members, completely unaware of the predator circling his pregnant girlfriend like a shark scenting blood. Jasmine wanted to catch his eye, to signal for help, but Elizabeth's presence commanded all her attention. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mrs. Stone. Oh, I think you're very sure indeed. Elizabeth's mask of social pleasantries finally slipped, revealing the steel beneath. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't recognize the signs? I've been managing crises for this family longer than you've been alive, Miss Carter. The words hit like physical blows. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of strength she'd inherited from generations of women who'd faced down worse than entitled white women in designer gowns. If you have something to say to me, Mrs. Stone, please say it directly. Very well. Elizabeth's voice turned businesslike, efficient. You're going to resign your position, effective immediately. You'll sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding any personal relationships you may have imagined with members of this family. In return, you'll receive a generous severance package and excellent references for future employment, preferably in another city. And if I refuse? Elizabeth's laugh was like ice crackling. Then you'll discover how unpleasant life can become for someone who threatens what I've spent 40 years building. Your employment record will reflect irregularities. Future employers will receive concerning reports about your professionalism. And that's just the beginning. Jasmine felt the room spinning slightly. Whether from pregnancy hormones or sheer rage, she couldn't tell. You're threatening me. I'm offering you a choice. Take the money and disappear quietly, or stay and watch everything you've worked for crumble around you. Elizabeth glanced meaningfully across the room toward William. My son has a tendency to make unfortunate romantic choices, but he's always come to his senses eventually. The question is whether you're smart enough to save yourself the humiliation of being discarded publicly. William loves me. The words came out stronger than Jasmine felt. William loved that social worker too. Sweet girl, very passionate about helping others. It was almost tragic how quickly he moved on once reality set in. Elizabeth's smile was predatory. Men like my son don't marry their secretaries, Miss Carter. They marry their equals. Women from appropriate families who understand what's expected of them. The mention of Keisha felt like a slap. Jasmine realized with sickening clarity that Elizabeth knew exactly what weapons would cause the most damage. That she'd researched William's past relationships and chosen her ammunition carefully. That was different. He was young. He was exactly the same age then as he is now. The only difference is that this time there's a child involved, which makes the situation considerably more complicated. Elizabeth's eyes dropped to Jasmine's stomach with distaste. But not impossible to resolve. Quietly. Discreetly. With appropriate financial support, of course. The implication hung in the air like poison. Jasmine felt bile rise in her throat, whether from morning sickness or revulsion, she couldn't tell. I want you to consider what's best for everyone involved, including the child. Elizabeth's voice softened with false sympathy. Do you really want to raise a son knowing his father chose duty over love? Knowing he destroyed his family's legacy for a moment of passion he ultimately regretted? Before Jasmine could respond, she felt a familiar presence behind her. William's voice cut through the noise of the gala like a blade. Mother. Ms. Carter. His tone was carefully neutral, but Jasmine could feel the tension radiating from him. I hope you're enjoying the evening. Elizabeth transformed instantly, her predatory expression melting into maternal warmth. William, darling. I was just complimenting Ms. Carter on tonight's excellent arrangements. Though she mentioned she might be taking some time off soon. Health reasons, I believe. William's eyes moved between them, and Jasmine saw the moment he realized this wasn't a casual conversation. Mother, perhaps we could continue this discussion privately? Oh, there's no need for privacy. Ms. Carter and I understand each other perfectly, don't we? Elizabeth's smile was triumphant. She was just telling me about her plans to pursue new opportunities. Weren't you, dear? Jasmine looked at William, seeing the recognition dawning in his eyes, the horror as he understood what his mother had done. But she also saw something else. The same calculation she'd glimpsed in the elevator, the same weighing of costs and consequences that had defined his relationship with Keisha. Is that true? William asked quietly, and in those 3 words, Jasmine heard all her worst fears confirmed. He wasn't demanding an explanation or defending her against his mother's obvious manipulation. He was asking if she was planning to disappear quietly, and his tone suggested he wasn't sure which answer he preferred. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of the auction and the clinking of champagne glasses. Jasmine felt something inside her chest crumble. Not break, but disintegrate into powder that would never be whole again. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady despite the destruction happening inside her. I've been thinking it might be time for a change. Elizabeth's smile was victorious. William's face went pale, but he didn't contradict her, didn't fight for her, didn't even ask her to reconsider. He just stood there, frozen between the woman who'd given him life and the woman carrying his child, and his silence was more devastating than any rejection could have been. Well then, Elizabeth said brightly, I suppose congratulations are in order. New beginnings are always exciting, aren't they? She glided away with the satisfaction of a general who'd won a war without firing a shot, leaving William and Jasmine standing in the shadows of his family's triumph. Around them, San Francisco's elite continued their celebration, oblivious to the small tragedy playing out near the service entrance. Jasmine, William started, but she stepped back before he could touch her. Don't. Her voice was quiet but final. Just don't. You can't actually be considering this. Whatever she said to you. She didn't say anything I hadn't already figured out myself. Jasmine looked at him, memorizing his face in the dim light. You're exactly who you've always been, William. I was foolish to think otherwise. That's not fair. You don't understand the position I'm in, the pressure. The pressure to choose between me and your family, between love and duty, between doing what's right and doing what's easy. Jasmine's laugh was bitter. You're right. I don't understand that pressure. I've never had the luxury of choosing anything but what's right. She turned to walk away, but William caught her arm gently. Please, don't do this. Don't let her win. Jasmine looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. She already has won, William. She won the moment you chose to stand there and calculate instead of fight for us. Just like you did with Keisha. The words hit him like physical blows, and his hand dropped away from her arm. I'm not the same man I was then. No, Jasmine agreed, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. You're worse. Because this time, you know exactly what you're losing, and you're choosing to lose it anyway. She walked away then, through the service entrance and out into the San Francisco night, leaving William standing alone in the shadows of his family's greatest social triumph. Behind her, the gala continued, champagne flowing and money changing hands for worthy causes, while the most important thing in William Stone's life disappeared into the fog rolling in from the bay. In her purse, nestled next to the ultrasound pictures of their son, the small velvet box containing William's promise felt like lead against her hip, a reminder of how quickly love could transform into loss when courage failed at the moment it mattered most. 3 weeks after the gala, Jasmine sat in her small apartment in Oakland, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the quiet that comes before life-changing decisions. Her resignation letter had been accepted without question, along with Elizabeth Stone's generous severance package. Money that felt like blood money, but would provide security for her and Cameron during the transition. Ava perched on the edge of the couch, holding a cup of ginger tea, and wearing the expression of someone who'd been watching her best friend slowly disappear into herself. "You sure about Atlanta?" "Patricia says there's a position waiting for me at Morrison Corporation, Senior Executive Assistant to the CEO, 20% salary increase, full benefits." Jasmine's voice was steady, practical. "It's a good opportunity." "That's not what I asked." Jasmine looked up from the baby clothes she was folding, tiny onesies and soft blankets in gender-neutral yellows and greens. At 7 months pregnant, Cameron made his presence known constantly now, kicking and stretching as if he too was restless with waiting. "I can't stay here, Ava. Every corner of this city reminds me of him. Every coffee shop where we had lunch, every late-night drive along the coast, every—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "It's better this way." "Cleaner." "Cleaner for who?" Before Jasmine could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The baby's room is ready. Cameron's room. Please come see it before you leave. W." She deleted the message without reading it aloud, but Ava had caught the change in her expression. "How many times is that this week?" "Doesn't matter." Jasmine resumed folding, her movements sharp and efficient. "I made my decision." "No, baby girl. You made a reaction. There's a difference." 43 floors above the city, William stood in what had once been his home office, and was now a nursery that would never be used. Soft blue walls, handcrafted furniture from Italy, a mobile with tiny airplanes that caught the afternoon light. Every detail chosen with obsessive care, every element designed to welcome the son he'd driven away before he could even be born. The door opened behind him, and he didn't need to turn to know it was his mother. Elizabeth's reflection appeared in the window beside his, and for the first time in his life, William felt nothing but disgust when he looked at her. "Still playing with dollhouses, I see." Her tone was light, dismissive. "William, darling, this melodrama has gone on long enough. You made the right choice, even if it doesn't feel that way now. Get out." "Excuse me?" William turned slowly, and Elizabeth stepped back at the expression on his face. "I said get out. Out of this room, out of my house, out of my life. Don't be ridiculous. You're upset, which is understandable, but—" "Upset?" William's laugh was razor-sharp. "I'm not upset, Mother. I'm awake. For the first time in 35 years, I'm completely awake." He moved to the crib, running his hand along the smooth railing. "Do you know what I realized, standing in that ballroom 3 weeks ago? I realized that I'm exactly the man you raised me to be. Weak. Cowardly. So terrified of disappointing you that I'd rather destroy everything I love than risk your disapproval. That's not. You killed Keisha as surely as if you'd held the pillow over her face yourself. And now you've driven away the mother of my child, the woman I love more than my own life, because you can't bear the thought of your social circle whispering about your son marrying beneath his station." Elizabeth's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "That woman was using you, William. They always are. The pregnancy was probably planned from the beginning, a way to trap you into." The words died in her throat as William stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "If you ever speak about Jasmine or my son that way again, I will destroy you. I will liquidate every asset you have access to, strip every privilege you've taken for granted, and leave you with exactly what you deserve, nothing but your own bitter loneliness." "You can't mean that. Try me." William's smile was cold enough to freeze fire. "I'm done being your perfect son. I'm done sacrificing my happiness for your approval. And I'm done pretending that your love is worth more than my self-respect." Elizabeth straightened, her own mask sliding back into place. "Fine. Throw away everything your father and I built for you. Embarrass the family name. But don't come crying to me when that woman takes you for everything you're worth and disappears." "She's not taking anything from me," William said quietly. "She's taking herself and my son away from me because I was too much of a coward to protect them when it mattered. Because I let you make me into exactly the kind of man who doesn't deserve either of them." After Elizabeth left, slamming the door with the fury of a woman unaccustomed to losing, William sank into the rocking chair he'd placed by the window. The chair where he'd imagined holding Cameron during late-night feedings, where he'd planned to read bedtime stories and share the dreams he'd never been allowed to voice as a child. His phone buzzed. A text from Robert about tomorrow's board meeting, another about quarterly projections, a third about the Henderson merger. The business of empire building continued, indifferent to personal destruction. William deleted them all and pulled up Jasmine's contact information instead. His thumb hovered over the call button, paralyzed by the certainty that he'd already waited too long, that some choices couldn't be unmade no matter how desperately you wanted to rewrite them. But then Cameron kicked against Jasmine's ribs. He'd felt it during the ultrasound, that fierce little life demanding recognition. And William realized that some things were worth fighting for even when you'd already lost them. Especially then. He stood up, pocketed his phone, and walked out of the nursery that might never hold his son. In the elevator descending toward the parking garage, he made the first truly brave decision of his life. Jasmine was taping up the last box of books when the knock came. Soft, hesitant, nothing like Ava's usual confident rap or the building manager's impatient pounding. She knew who it was before she opened the door, the same way she'd known she was pregnant before taking the test. Some knowledge that bypassed logic and went straight to the heart. William stood in her doorway looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. But his eyes were different. Clearer. More present than she'd ever seen them. "I know I don't have the right to be here," he said before she could speak. "I know I forfeited any claim to your time or attention the moment I let my mother speak to you that way. But I need to tell you something, and then I'll leave you alone if that's what you want." Jasmine wanted to close the door, to protect herself from whatever hope he might offer, and then snatch away again. But Cameron chose that moment to kick particularly hard, as if he too wanted to hear what his father had to say. "5 minutes," she said, stepping back to let him in. William looked around the apartment he'd never been invited to before. The modest space where she'd built a life independent of him, where she'd made a home that had nothing to do with his money or his name. His eyes lingered on the packed boxes, the evidence of her imminent departure. "I fired my mother from the Stone Foundation Board," he said without preamble. "Stripped her access to all family accounts. She's no longer welcome in my home or my life." Jasmine blinked, not sure she'd heard correctly. "What?" "I also called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I'm going to tell them everything, about us, about Cameron, about the fact that I plan to marry you if you'll have me, and about what will happen to anyone who has a problem with any of those things." "William, I'm not finished." His voice was steady, determined. "I've already spoken to 3 headhunters about finding my replacement as CEO. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, enough to start over anywhere, to build something new that doesn't carry the weight of my family's expectations." Jasmine stared at him, trying to process words that seemed to come from a different man than the one who'd stood silent while his mother threatened her. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." William took a step closer, then stopped, respecting the space between them. "I lost Keisha because I was young and scared and didn't understand that some things are worth any price. I almost lost you and Cameron because I was still that same coward, still choosing comfort over courage. And now I know that I'd rather be broke and happy with you than rich and miserable without you. I'd rather raise our son in a 1-bedroom apartment where he's loved than in a mansion where he's ashamed of who his parents are." William's voice broke slightly. "I'd rather be the man who fought for his family than the man who inherited everything and chose nothing." Jasmine felt tears threatening, but she held them back. "Pretty words again, William. But words are. I bought you a house." That stopped her short. "What?" "In Atlanta. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, good school district. It's in your name, deed, mortgage, everything. Whether you want me there or not, whether you can ever forgive me or not, you and Cameron will have a home that no one can ever take away from you." "Why would you?" "Because I love you." Because I love our son. Because even if I can never make up for failing you when you needed me most, I can make sure you never have to depend on anyone else's mercy ever again. William pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. The deed, the keys, and a letter from the best family law attorney in Georgia guaranteeing that Cameron will never want for anything, regardless of what happens between us. Jasmine took the envelope with trembling hands, staring at her name printed in official type. This is crazy. Crazy would be letting you walk away again without fighting for you. Crazy would be spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose love over legacy. William's hands clenched at his sides, as if restraining himself from reaching for her. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise the transition will be easy. But I can promise that I will never, ever put anything or anyone above you and our son again. And if I can't forgive you, if the trust is too broken to repair, then I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of being Cameron's father, even if I never earn the right to be your husband. William's smile was sad but genuine. Some things are worth a lifetime of effort, Jasmine. You taught me that. They stood in silence, surrounded by boxes and possibilities, while outside Atlanta waited with its promise of new beginnings. Jasmine felt Cameron moving inside her, restless and strong, and wondered if love really could triumph over fear, if courage really could be learned instead of inherited. The choice was hers now, the same choice William had finally learned to make, but hers to accept or reject. And for the first time since the gala, she felt like she might be brave enough to make it. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office on the 43rd floor of Stone Enterprises, casting golden light across the mahogany desk where Jasmine Carter Stone reviewed quarterly projections. The nameplate facing outward read Director of Strategic Operations, but the view remained the same, San Francisco Bay stretching endlessly toward the horizon, morning fog rolling in like a daily promise of new beginnings. "Mommy, look what I made." Cameron burst through the office door with the confidence of a 4-year-old who knew he was always welcome, his dark curls bouncing as he ran toward her desk. He clutched a drawing in his small hands, stick figures that somehow perfectly captured their little family. Mommy with her hair in a bun, Daddy with his serious expression, and Cameron himself grinning between them. "That's beautiful, baby," Jasmine said, lifting him onto her lap and marveling, as she did every day, at how perfectly he fit there. Cameron had inherited William's gray eyes and her stubborn chin, along with a personality that was entirely his own, fearless, curious, and completely unimpressed by the corporate world that surrounded him. "Daddy said I could hang it in his office too," Cameron announced, then lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I think yours is better. You have good windows." Jasmine laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Don't let Daddy hear you say that. He's still adjusting to having an office smaller than mine." The truth was, William had adjusted to far more than a smaller office. After stepping down as CEO 2 years ago to focus on the family foundation he'd built from scratch, he'd discovered a passion for philanthropy that had been buried under decades of corporate expectations. The William Stone Foundation now funded education programs in underserved communities, with a special focus on literacy and technology access, causes that would have made Keisha proud. "Mrs. Carter Stone?" Ava's voice came through the intercom, warm with amusement. "Your 10 o'clock is here." Jasmine glanced at her calendar, frowning. She didn't remember scheduling. The door opened to reveal William, holding a bouquet of yellow roses and wearing the soft smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. He'd kept his promise about choosing love over legacy, but he'd also kept his sense of humor and his gift for surprising her. "Mr. Stone," she said formally, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I don't believe we had an appointment." "Emergency board meeting," he replied solemnly, settling into the chair across from her desk, the same chair where this had all begun 5 years ago. "We need to discuss some very important matters regarding the Carter Stone Family Foundation." "Daddy's being silly," Cameron informed his mother seriously. "We don't have a foundation. We have a family." "Exactly right," William said, reaching over to ruffle his son's hair. Which brings me to the first order of business. He pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, and Jasmine's breath caught. Not because she didn't know what was coming. William had been dropping hints for weeks about upgrading her engagement ring, but because the gesture still had the power to make her feel like the young woman who'd fallen in love with him in this very office. Jasmine Carter, William said, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the morning light. 5 years ago, I gave you a ring and made promises I wasn't brave enough to keep. Today, I want to give you a new ring and make new promises, ones I've already proven I can honor. He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds, nothing like the traditional solitaire he'd given her before. This ring was bold, unique, impossible to ignore, like the woman wearing it. This time, I promise to choose you every day, in every meeting, in every decision, in every moment that matters. I promise to build a legacy with you instead of for you. I promise to raise our son to be proud of both his parents and to know that love is always worth fighting for. William's voice grew thick with emotion. And I promise to never again let fear make me smaller than the love you. Cameron clapped excitedly as Jasmine extended her left hand, watching through tears as William slipped the new ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. The emerald caught the light like captured fire, beautiful and strong and absolutely perfect. What do you say, Mrs. Carterstone? William asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Ready for the next 5 years? Only 5. Jasmine teased, then grew serious. I love you, William Stone. All of you, the scared boy, the reformed CEO, the man who learned to choose love over everything else that seemed important. And I love you, he replied, leaning across the desk to kiss her softly. The woman who taught me that some things are worth any sacrifice, and that the best inheritance I can leave our son is the knowledge that his parents fought for each other. Gross, Cameron declared, though he was grinning. Can we have lunch now? Ava said there's cake in the break room. Cake? William raised an eyebrow. What's the occasion? The occasion, Ava said, appearing in the doorway with a knowing smile, is that your wife just landed the Morrison Corporation account. Biggest client acquisition in company history. William's face transformed with pride and amazement. Jasmine, that's incredible. When did you? While you were planning romantic gestures, she said smugly. I was negotiating the deal that's going to fund your foundation's expansion into 3 new states. Mommy's the best, Cameron announced with the absolute certainty of a 4-year-old stating obvious facts. She's the boss of everything. Not everything, Jasmine corrected gently, but everything that matters to us. They walked to the break room together. The small family that had emerged from secrets and mistakes, from courage found and choices made. Robert was there with the rest of the senior staff, along with Patricia, who'd flown in from Atlanta for the contract signing. The cake was decorated with congratulations in elegant script, and someone had already started the champagne. As the celebration swirled around them, William pulled Jasmine aside near the window where this had all begun. Do you ever regret it? He asked quietly. Coming back here, giving me another chance, building something new from the ashes of what we almost destroyed. Jasmine looked out at the bay, at the fog rolling in from the Pacific, at the city sprawling below them like a promise kept. Then she looked at Cameron, who was charming Patricia into giving him extra frosting, and at William, whose eyes held all the love and certainty she'd once thought impossible. The only thing I regret, she said, reaching up to straighten his tie with the casual intimacy of a woman who'd learned to trust again, is that it took us so long to get here. Here is pretty perfect, William agreed, his arms circling her waist. Here is just the beginning, Jasmine corrected, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. We haven't told Cameron yet, but he's going to be a big brother. William's face went through a series of expressions, shock, joy, wonder, and finally pure happiness. Another baby? Another adventure, Jasmine confirmed. Think you're up for it. With you. William's smile was radiant, transformative. I'm up for anything. Outside, San Francisco gleamed in the afternoon sun, the fog retreating to reveal a city of infinite possibilities. In the break room, Their colleagues celebrated a business triumph. In her grandmother's old jewelry box at home, Jasmine kept the ultrasound picture of their first miracle next to the one they'd get next week for their second. And in the corner office where it all began, two people who'd learned that love was worth any risk held each other close and planned a future that honored both their dreams and their responsibilities. Cameron's laughter echoed through the halls of Stone Enterprises, a sound that would have been impossible 5 years ago, but now felt as natural as breathing. It was the sound of a family that had fought for each other, of love that had learned to be stronger than fear, of promises kept and new ones being made every day. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic reversals. This one ended with the quiet certainty of two people who discovered that the most revolutionary act of all was simply choosing each other, again and again, until choosing became as natural as loving. And in the city by the bay, where fog rolls in like clockwork and second chances are as common as morning coffee, that was exactly the kind of ending that could last forever. What does it truly mean to choose love over legacy? And how do we teach the next generation that the greatest inheritance we can leave them is the knowledge that they are worth fighting for? If this story touched you, do me a favor to subscribe for more beautiful stories like this. God bless you.